In the controlled atmosphere of the Ankara Ethnography Museum's vault, far from public view, lies an object that defies its own existence. It is a book. Thick, bound in darkened leather, its coarse parchment pages are filled with a dense, angular Aramaic script, the very language spoken by Jesus of Nazareth. Officially, it is 1,500 years old. Unofficially, it is a time bomb, planted at the foundation of one of the world's largest religions. In the year 2000, Turkish authorities, during an anti-smuggling operation, intercepted a gang attempting to move it out of the country. The artifact's black market value was estimated at $25 million, but its true value cannot be measured in currency. It is measured in the potential for chaos. Because within the pages of this book, known as the Gospel of Barnabas, is a story we were never meant to hear. A story in which Jesus was not crucified. A story in which another man died on the cross. And this is merely the first page of our investigation. The first thread that, when pulled, threatens to unravel the entire fabric of history as we know it. Because this book is not an isolated anomaly. It is a ghost from a vast, burned and forgotten library of knowledge that for centuries, powerful forces have tried to erase from human memory. And the most important question is not what is written on these pages. The most important question is, what else have they hidden from us? Before we dive in, just a quick reminder that a simple like and subscribe is the best way to support the channel. Thank you so much for being here. To understand why a single ancient book can provoke such panic, we must return to the source, to the turbulent, chaotic era that followed the death of Jesus Christ. Today, we perceive Christianity as a monolith and the Bible as a single, divinely inspired book. But this is an illusion, crafted by centuries of deliberate editing. In the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, Christianity was not a unified church. It was an explosion of ideas, a kaleidoscope of dozens, if not hundreds, of different movements, sects, and philosophical schools, each interpreting the life and teachings of the Galilean preacher in its own way. And each of these groups had its own sacred texts. There were Gospels of the Egyptians, of the Hebrews, of Peter. There were texts attributed to Philip, Thomas, Mary Magdalene. Some of them, known as the Gnostic Gospels, painted a completely different picture of the world. In them, Jesus appeared not as a divine savior dying for the sins of humanity, but as a mystical teacher, a bringer of secret knowledge, gnosis. He came not to establish a church, but to awaken the divine spark hidden within each person. In the Gospel of Thomas, discovered in 1945 in the Egyptian desert near Nag Hammadi, Jesus says, "The kingdom of God is inside you, and it is outside you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known. But if you will not know yourselves, you dwell in poverty, and it is you who are that poverty." This was a radical, almost anarchic idea. It required no priests, no bishops, no church hierarchy. It made each individual responsible for their own salvation. This version of Christianity was a direct threat to the emerging Orthodox Church, which sought centralization, order, and power. Church fathers like Irenaeus of Lyons and Tertullian waged a veritable information war. They wrote treatises branding the Gnostics and their teachings as dangerous heresy. They compiled lists of correct books that were to form the basis of the official canon. This was not a battle for spiritual truth, but a battle for control of the narrative. Who would decide who Jesus was? Whose story would become the official version? The turning point came in the 4th century. The Roman Empire was cracking at the seams, torn apart by internal conflicts. Emperor Constantine the Great, a pragmatic and brilliant politician, realized that the new, rapidly growing religion could be the glue to hold his crumbling empire together. But for that, it needed a single standard. In 325 AD, in the city of Nicaea, he convened the First Ecumenical Council. Hundreds of bishops from all over the empire gathered to unify the doctrine. They argued about the nature of Christ, approved the Nicene Creed, and most importantly, continued the process of forming the canon. Books that did not fit into the new imperial version of Christianity were declared apocrypha, hidden, secret writings. Their possession and reading became a crime. Across the empire, bonfires of parchments burned. Thousands of texts containing alternative views on the life and teachings of Jesus were destroyed. It was one of the greatest cultural purges in human history. A library of knowledge accumulated over 300 years was burned to the ground. It is in this context that the discovery in Ankara must be viewed. The Gospel of Barnabas is a text that fits perfectly into Islamic tradition. In the Quran, Isa, Jesus, is one of the greatest prophets, but not the Son of God. The Quran also denies his crucifixion. In the Surah An-Nisa, it says, "And they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but another was made to resemble him to them." The book of Barnabas details this very version. It says that at the last moment, God changed the appearance of Judas Iscariot, making him look like Jesus, and it was the traitor, not the teacher, who was crucified by the Romans. Jesus himself was taken up to heaven alive. Furthermore, in the text, Jesus directly predicts the coming of the prophet Muhammad. For the Christian world, this is absolute heresy, but for Muslims, it is a confirmation of their faith. It is not surprising that the Vatican showed great interest in the manuscript, requesting it for study. Most Western scholars consider the book a medieval forgery, created in the 14th or 15th century, possibly by a European Muslim to give Islamic teachings greater legitimacy in the eyes of Christians. They point to anachronisms and historical inaccuracies in the text. But even if it is a forgery, the very fact of its existence speaks volumes. It speaks of the unceasing struggle for history, of how even 1,000 years after the Council of Nicaea, alternative versions continued to appear, challenging the official doctrine. This book is just one surviving volume from a vast lost library, and it makes one wonder, if so much effort was put into erasing mere words, perhaps there was something more than just words to hide. Central to the canonical Gospels are the miracles of Jesus. He turns water into wine, walks on water, raises the dead. But most stories are dedicated to his healing power. With a simple touch, and sometimes just a word, he cures lepers, restores sight to the blind, and casts out demons. For the Orthodox Church, these miracles are the primary proof of his divinity. Only the Son of God could violate the laws of nature. But what if here, too, we are dealing with an edited version? What if the alternative texts, the very ones that were burned, offered a completely different explanation? Many Gnostic teachings viewed healing power not as a supernatural miracle, but as a manifestation of a deep understanding of the laws of the universe. For them, Jesus was a master who had achieved enlightenment. He did not break reality, he acted in harmony with it. He saw the subtle energies from which the world is woven and knew how to manipulate them. In this context, his healings are not magic, but a kind of advanced spiritual technology. He didn't just heal the body, he restored a person's energetic balance, harmonizing their connection with the divine source. And most importantly, he taught this to others. His goal was not to impress the crowds with tricks, but to show everyone the path to unlocking their own potential. Modern science, of course, rejects such explanations. Attempts to find a rational kernel in the biblical miracles are reduced to a few hypotheses. Some scientists suggest that many illnesses were psychosomatic, and Jesus, being a charismatic leader, could achieve healing through powerful suggestion, a kind of ancient hypnosis. The placebo effect, amplified by the faith of the crowd and the authority of the healer, could work true wonders. Others believe that some of the described diseases might have been misdiagnosed. For example, a person in a cataleptic trance or coma could have been mistaken for dead, and their resurrection was actually an awakening. But all these explanations overlook one thing. In almost all cultures of the world, there are healing traditions based on the concept of life energy. Qi in China, Prana in India, Mana in Polynesia, Reiki, Qigong, pranic healing, all these systems, though considered pseudoscience, are based on the idea that a living organism is not just a collection of chemical elements, but a complex energy system, and illness is a disruption of the flow of energy. Could Jesus have been a carrier of such knowledge, brought to the highest level of mastery? Interestingly, even in the canonical texts, there are hints of something more than just divine intervention. The Gospel of Mark describes the healing of a woman suffering from a hemorrhage. She secretly touches the hem of his garment and is instantly healed. Jesus, feeling this, turns and asks, "Who touched me?" The disciples are surprised. There is a crowd around. Everyone is pushing him. But he insists, "I felt power go out from me." This phrase stands out from the general narrative. Here, power appears as a finite, tangible resource that can be transferred to another person. This sounds more like a description of an energy practice than an act of divine will. What if the knowledge of these practices, of this technology of healing, was one of the things that the Orthodox Church deemed too dangerous for its flock? After all, if everyone can learn to heal themselves and others, why are priests and their rituals needed? If the power is within the person and not from an external authority, the entire structure of church power collapses. Perhaps the stories of miracles were deliberately edited, transformed from lessons in self-development into a demonstration of a divine monopoly on power. We were made to believe that we are powerless and can only pray for a miracle. And the knowledge of how to perform these miracles ourselves was declared heresy and burned along with the Gnostic Gospels. From burned texts and lost knowledge, we move to an object that has not just survived, but seems to scream of its own existence. It is a book so large, so strange, and so frightening that its very being seems to challenge common sense. It is known as the Codex Gigas, or the Giant Book. But it has another, far more famous name, the Devil's Bible. This is the largest medieval manuscript in the world. Its dimensions are staggering: 92 centimeters high, 50 centimeters wide, and 22 centimeters thick. It weighs 75 kilograms. To make it required the skins of more than 160 donkeys. When you stand next to it in its glass sarcophagus in the National Library of Sweden in Stockholm, you feel its physical power, its oppressive presence. But the true mystery of the Codex is not its size, but its origin and content. The legend surrounding the book is a thriller in itself. It tells that the Codex was written in the early 13th century in a Benedictine monastery in Bohemia, in what is now the Czech Republic. One of the monks, named Herman, committed a terrible sin, breaking his vow. As punishment, the brothers sentenced him to be walled up alive. In desperation, to save his life, the monk made an incredible vow. In a single night, he would write the greatest book in the world, containing the entire Bible and all human knowledge, and thus glorify their monastery forever. The brothers, intrigued by such audacity, agreed. Herman locked himself in his cell with a mountain of parchment and ink, but soon realized the task was impossible. Near midnight, realizing he was doomed, he took one last desperate act. He called not to God, but to his adversary. He summoned the devil, and he offered him a deal: his soul in exchange for help in creating the book. The Prince of Darkness appeared and agreed. By morning, the Codex was finished. In gratitude for his help, the monk added one detail to the book: a huge, full-page portrait of his co-author. This, of course, is just a legend. But like any good legend, it contains a grain of truth that makes the blood run cold. When modern paleographers examined the Codex Gigas, they came to a stunning conclusion. Analysis of the handwriting, writing style, and ink composition showed that the entire book, from the first to the last page, over 6 huge pages of text and illustrations, was written by a single person. There are no traces of other scribes, no changes in handwriting that inevitably occur with age or fatigue. The calligraphy is absolutely uniform. According to experts, just to copy such a volume of text, not to mention creating the complex illustrations and initials, would have taken one person 20 to 30 years of continuous work. But the handwriting in the Codex shows no signs of the scribe aging. It is the same at the beginning as it is at the end. This has led some researchers to suggest that the work was completed in an incredibly short period, perhaps a year or two. But even that seems physically impossible. The legend of the deal with the devil suddenly ceases to seem like a mere fairy tale. The content of the book is no less mysterious. It is a kind of medieval Wikipedia. It contains the full text of the Old and New Testaments in the Old Latin Vulgate translation. But next to it are Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews, Isidore of Seville's Etymologiae, essentially the first encyclopedia, the popular medieval medical treatise Ars Medicinae, and Cosmas of Prague's Chronicle of Bohemia. And between the Old and New Testaments, at the very heart of the book, is what makes it unique. First comes a full-page image of the heavenly city of Jerusalem, and on the next spread, directly opposite it, is that very portrait. On a full page, almost half a meter high, the devil is depicted. He is drawn in a primitive but incredibly powerful style. Green skin, claws on his hands and feet, horns, a forked tongue. He is crouching, like a beast in a cage, and looks directly at the reader. This is the only image of its kind in a medieval manuscript. The devil was usually depicted as small, pathetic, defeated by Christ or the saints. Here, he is a central figure, powerful and terrifying. And immediately after his portrait begin the pages that have given the Codex its infamous reputation. It is a collection of magic spells, rituals for exorcising evil spirits, incantations to cause illness, instructions for finding treasure. It is a practical guide to black magic, woven into the same book as the Holy Scripture. What is this? Why did a Benedictine monk create this strange hybrid of sanctity and heresy? Was it an act of repentance, an attempt to gather all knowledge, both good and evil, to better understand the world? Or was it something more sinister? A manifesto declaring that good and evil are two sides of the same coin, and that knowledge, all knowledge, has a right to exist? The Codex Gigas is a surviving artifact from that same lost library. But if the Gnostic Gospels were just an alternative point of view, this book is a view from the abyss itself. It represents the knowledge that the Church not only ignored, but actively demonized. Knowledge of forces that, it claimed, should not be accessible to man. But what if the Church feared not that these forces were dangerous, but that they were real? And what if the greatest secret it guarded was not a text, but an object? A source of power so immense that it could change the course of history. From texts containing forbidden knowledge, we arrive at the pinnacle of our investigation. To an object that is not merely a symbol, but according to descriptions, a functioning device. A device of incredible power. The Ark of the Covenant. According to the biblical book of Exodus, the instructions for creating the Ark were given to Moses by God himself on Mount Sinai. And these instructions are striking in their technical precision. This is not a vague description of a sacred object, but a genuine technical specification. A box of acacia wood, approximately 125 by 75 by 75 centimeters. It was to be overlaid with pure gold inside and out. The lid, the mercy seat, also of pure gold, with two cast cherubim at the ends, their wings spreading over the lid, creating a kind of canopy. At the corners of the box were gold rings, into which poles of acacia wood, also covered in gold, were inserted for carrying. Touching the ark itself was strictly forbidden on pain of death. Inside the box, Moses was to place the stone tablets with the 10 Commandments. What was it? Just an ornate chest for storing a holy relic? Descriptions of its actions suggest otherwise. The ark is a weapon. During the 40-year wandering in the desert, it went ahead of the Israelite army. The waters of the Jordan River parted before it. Its presence brought down the walls of Jericho. It struck the enemies of the Israelites with plagues and sores. When the Philistines captured the ark in battle and brought it to their city, their idol, a statue of the god Dagon, fell prostrate before it twice, and a plague of deadly tumors fell upon the inhabitants. In terror, they returned the ark. The story of a certain Uzzah, who merely touched the ark to keep it from falling and was immediately struck dead, has become a classic. Many researchers who have tried to find a rational explanation for these phenomena have pointed to the striking similarity of the ark's construction to an electrical capacitor, specifically a Leyden jar. Acacia wood is a dielectric. The two layers of gold, inner and outer, are conductors. This design is ideal for accumulating static electricity. The desert air is dry and conducive to the generation of powerful electrostatic charges. Perhaps the ark accumulated electricity from the atmosphere, and its discharge could be lethal. The two cherubim on the lid could have served as spark gaps, between which a spark would jump. This would explain why it could only be carried by insulated wooden poles, and why touching it was deadly. Other theories go even further. Some see it as a kind of radio transmitter, a device for communicating with God, or even a power source, possibly radioactive. The stone tablets inside might not have been ordinary stone, but some radioactive mineral, and the gold box served as a protective container. This would explain both its deadly power and the radiation-like sickness among the Philistines. Whatever its nature, the ark was the greatest relic and the most powerful weapon of ancient Israel. King David brought it to Jerusalem, and his son Solomon placed it in the Holy of Holies of his newly built temple. There it remained, hidden from all eyes for nearly 400 years. And then, in 587 BC, the Babylonian army of Nebuchadnezzar captured and destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. From that moment on, the Ark of the Covenant disappears from the pages of history, without a trace. Where did it go? This is one of the greatest mysteries of archaeology. There are several main theories, each resembling the plot of an adventure film. The first and most famous leads us to Ethiopia. According to the Ethiopian national epic, the Kebra Nagast, the Ark was taken from Jerusalem long before the Babylonian invasion. It was stolen by Menelik Firtush, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. He brought the Ark to Ethiopia, and it has supposedly been kept there ever since, in a small chapel next to the Church of St. Mary of Zion in the city of Axum. Only one guardian monk has access to it, who dedicates his entire life to it and never leaves the chapel grounds. No outsider, no scientist has ever seen this artifact. Is it the original, or is it an ancient copy? Without access to the object, there is no answer. The second theory is based on the apocryphal Second Book of Maccabees. According to this book, the prophet Jeremiah, foreseeing the Babylonian invasion, took the ark and hid it in a cave on Mount Nebo, the mountain from which Moses viewed the promised land before he died. Jeremiah then sealed the entrance to the cave, declaring that the place would remain unknown until God gathers his people together and shows his mercy. Many treasure hunters, including the famous Ron Wyatt, have tried to find this cave, but without success. But the most intriguing and most dangerous theory is that the ark never disappeared at all. It was simply hidden. The priests of Solomon's temple, knowing of the imminent invasion, carried it into a complex system of tunnels and chambers located deep beneath the Temple Mount, and it is still there. This theory has been a driving force for many, from the Knights Templar, who spent 9 years excavating under the Al-Aqsa Mosque, to Rabbi Yehuda Getz in 1981. What if the humming his men heard was not just a vibration? What if it was the sound of an ancient, still-functioning device? What if the breath of the Leviathan, recorded by modern scientists, is the sound of a power source hidden in a sealed chamber for 2,500 years? The search for the Ark is not just a hunt for an ancient artifact. It is a search for the key to understanding the nature of the power that shaped Western civilization. And this brings us to the final, darkest chapter of our investigation, to the story of a man who, it is claimed, did not seek divine power, but made a deal with its opposite. We transport ourselves from the ancient world to 17th century England, an era of gunpowder, religious wars, and political turmoil. At the center of this storm stands one of the most controversial figures in British history, Oliver Cromwell. To some, he is a revolutionary hero, a founding father of parliamentary democracy who freed England from the tyranny of King Charles I. To others, especially the Irish, he is a war criminal, a religious fanatic, and a regicide whose hands are drenched in blood. But there is a third shadow history, a legend that has been whispered for centuries, a story that Cromwell owed his incredible rise not only to military genius and divine providence, but also to a pact with the devil. Cromwell was a man from nowhere, a modest landowner, a member of Parliament for Huntingdon, known for his deep Puritan faith. When the Civil War broke out between Parliament and the King, no one could have predicted that this 40-year-old farmer would become the greatest general of his age. But he did. His new model army, composed of fanatically loyal soldiers, crushed the royalist forces in one battle after another. Cromwell believed that he was led by God himself. Every victory was a sign of divine approval for him. This unshakable belief in his own righteousness made him both effective and ruthless. He was not just fighting the king, he was carrying out the will of the Almighty. The climax came in 1649, when Charles I was tried and publicly executed. For the first time in history, a people had beheaded their monarch. Cromwell became the de facto ruler of England, Scotland, and Ireland, receiving the title of Lord Protector. But it was at the peak of his fame, on the eve of the decisive Battle of Worcester in 1651, that the mysterious event allegedly took place. This story has come down to us through a single source, the account of a certain Colonel Lindsay, who served under Cromwell. According to his testimony, on the morning of September 3rd, the day of the battle, Cromwell took him for a walk in the secluded Perry Wood. There, an old man with a parchment in his hands awaited them. Lindsay claimed that a bargain was struck between Cromwell and the old man. The old man offered Cromwell complete and unconditional power for 7 years, in exchange for his soul. Cromwell allegedly bargained fiercely, demanding 21 years, but the old man was adamant, 7 years. In the end, Cromwell agreed. He returned to camp excited and joyful, declaring that victory was in their grasp. That same day, his army utterly defeated the forces of the future King Charles II. This could be dismissed as mere royalist propaganda, an attempt to blacken their enemy's name. But subsequent events give one pause. Cromwell ruled as an absolute dictator. He dissolved parliament, established a military dictatorship, and brutally suppressed all rebellions, especially in Catholic Ireland, where his campaigns were accompanied by massacres of civilians. His rule was effective, but grim and joyless. And then came the year 1658. Exactly 7 years after the Battle of Worcester, almost to the day, Oliver Cromwell, who was only 59, suddenly and gravely fell ill. Doctors diagnosed him with malaria and kidney stones. On September 3, 1658, the anniversary of his greatest victory, he died. It is said that on the day of his death, the most terrible storm in recorded history swept over England. People whispered that the devil had come to claim his due, but the story did not end there. After Cromwell's death, his system collapsed. His son Richard proved to be a weak ruler. In less than 2 years, the monarchy was restored, and Charles II returned to the throne. Driven by a thirst for revenge, the new king ordered an act of unprecedented barbarism. Oliver Cromwell's body was exhumed from its tomb in Westminster Abbey. It was hanged in a public square and then beheaded. The Lord Protector's head was impaled on a spike and displayed above Westminster Hall, where it remained for nearly a quarter of a century. Cromwell's story is the perfect conclusion to our investigation. It brings us full circle. We began with lost knowledge and divine power, and we end with the story of a man who may have turned to a forbidden power. Cromwell, like the creator of the Codex Gigas, like the seekers of the Ark, stood on the border between worlds. He was a man who believed he had direct contact with a higher power. But what was this power? Divine providence? Or something else, something darker that merely wore the mask of piety? His story is a parable of how absolute faith in one's righteousness can lead to absolute power, and how absolute power can demand an absolute price. We have come a long way, from the dusty pages of a dubious gospel in a Turkish museum to the chilling legend of a deal with the devil in an English wood. We have seen how the canon was born, how libraries of alternative knowledge were burned, and how powerful artifacts vanished from the pages of history, leaving only myths behind. All these stories, so different at first glance, are in fact pieces of one enormous puzzle. They are fragments of the shadow, unwritten history of Western civilization. What if all this is not just a collection of coincidences and legends? What if these are links in a single chain? What if there existed an ancient, powerful knowledge about the nature of reality, about the forces that govern it, a knowledge that was divided? One part, the spiritual, was distorted, edited, and turned into a religion for the masses, while its most powerful practices were declared heresy. Another part, the technological, was embodied in objects like the Ark of the Covenant, which were either hidden or lost. And the third, darkest part, concerning the direct manipulation of power for the sake of power, was declared diabolical, but secretly practiced by those who craved might. We live in a world built by the victors of that ancient information war. Our history, our religion, our science, all are the result of choices made long ago. The choice of which books to read and which to burn, which knowledge to consider sacred and which heretical. But what if that choice was a mistake? What did we lose along with the burned libraries? What possibilities, what paths of development were cut off from us forever? The Gospel of Barnabas, even if it is a forgery, reminds us that history is never final. The Codex Gigas, that monster of parchment and ink, proves that there are artifacts that challenge our understanding of the possible. The empty niches where the Ark of the Covenant once stood tell us that the most important elements of the equation may be lost. And the grim figure of Oliver Cromwell makes us ponder the true price of power. The main question that remains after this investigation is not a question of faith. It is a question of knowledge. What do we really know about our past? How reliable is the foundation upon which our present is built? If one book can call into question the foundations of faith for 2 billion people, if the legend of a monk and the devil finds strange confirmation in scientific analysis, if the most sacred artifact in history is described as a deadly device, then perhaps we should admit that we are reading only the official, edited version. And the real story, with all its wonders, horrors, and unsolvable mysteries, is still waiting for its moment, hidden in the shadows. What do you think? Are these stories just a collection of myths and propaganda? Or are they scattered evidence of something real that was deliberately erased from the pages of history? Share your thoughts in the comments, because the next chapter of this investigation has not yet been written, and perhaps you are the one who will find the key to it. A huge thank you to everyone who watched this video to the end. Your support, a like, and a subscription is very important to us. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you can always stay up to date and never miss our new videos.